The first rain of the season had come and gone, leaving the air over Dry Creek Valley smelling of clean dust and wet sage. It was the kind of rain that washed the surface, but not the sorrow buried underneath. Arthur Morgan felt that same weariness deep in his bones. He had been riding for days, 300 miles or more, from the busted silver mines in the north, down to this lonely crease of Nevada land. His horse, a steady buckskin gelding named Dusty, moved slow and sure down the slope. The sun was bleeding out behind the western mountains, painting the clouds in bruised purples and streaks of orange and pink. The damp earth smelled alive again, and the glimmer of light on the wet brush made the whole valley shine as if it were coated in glass. It was beautiful, but it was a lonely kind of beauty, the kind that reminded a man how small he really was. Arthur hadn't seen another soul in weeks. The sight below, a proper ranch with a timber house, a tall barn, and smoke rising from a stone chimney, felt almost like seeing civilization again. It looked peaceful, like a place where the world still made sense. He reined in his horse and stared for a long time. He was 32, though the silver in his hair and the lines at his eyes told a harder story. The mines had taken his health and filled his nights with ghosts. He carried one memory heavier than the rest. A collapse, the roar of rock, and a man he hadn't been able to save. He had left those hills with nothing but Dusty, a saddle, and a hope that maybe somewhere he could start again. The ranch in the valley looked like that kind of place. A bit of order in a world of chaos. Maybe here a man like him could find peace. He nudged his horse forward. As he got closer, the smell of wet hay and animals filled the air. A dog started barking, deep and fierce, and the front door of the ranch house opened. A broad man stepped out, framed by the glow of lamplight, a rifle resting easy in his arm. His voice carried sharp through the evening. "We ain't a hotel." Stranger Arthur kept his hands where the man could see them. "I'm not looking for charity," he said. "Just work and a bed. I can handle horses, mend fences, drive cattle. I work hard and keep quiet." The rancher studied him a long while. His eyes were pale blue and sharp as a hawk's. He looked Arthur over, from the old saddle to the worn boots and the quiet steadiness in the man's face. He didn't trust easily. "Name's Angus McDowell," he said finally. "This here's the McDowell Ranch. Trouble finds drifters easy out this way. You running from something?" "Left it behind," Arthur said softly. Angus's gaze stayed hard, but before he could answer, the front door opened again. A young woman stepped out, holding a dish towel in her hands. Her hair was jet black, pulled back neat, but a few strands caught the last of the sunset. Her face was serious, her eyes clear and steady. Strong eyes, not delicate. She looked at Arthur just once, then her father's voice broke the stillness. "Get back inside." She didn't flinch, just gave her father a look that spoke of quiet independence. Then she turned and disappeared back into the house, the light closing around her. Angus's jaw tightened. "My daughter's got no business talking to strangers." He'd taken Mayan as his own when she was just a child, found alone after a raid on a nearby settlement, and his protectiveness over her was fiercer than any fence on his land. "Yes, sir," Arthur said respectfully. They stood silent, the dog growling low, the air thick with tension. Angus was weighing something in his mind. The rain had come early this year, and he was 2 hands short for the season. This drifter looked rough, but there was something decent about him, something that didn't ring false. Finally, Angus lowered his rifle. "The bunkhouse is out back. There's a spare cot. You'll eat with the men. $30 a month and found. You cause trouble, you're gone before dawn. Understand?" "I understand," Arthur said. "Good. See to your horse. Supper's in an hour." Angus turned and disappeared into the house, the dog padding after him. Arthur let out a slow breath. For the first time in months, he had a place to sleep that wasn't under the open sky. He led Dusty to the barn, the scent of hay and the low sounds of horses shifting in their stalls a comfort in its truest form. He brushed down his horse, talking to him in a low voice, the way a man does when he has no one else to talk to. Then he found his cot in the bunkhouse. The place was dark and quiet. 2 other men were already there, a grey-bearded old hand they called Gus, and a younger one named Finn, thin as a fence post. They looked him over, nodded once, and went back to what they were doing. No questions asked. Through the grimy window, Arthur could see the main house glowing softly in the dark. One light burned in an upstairs room. He wondered if it was hers, the rancher's daughter, Mai. He didn't know her name yet, but he'd remember her face. He lay back on the cot, hands behind his head, listening to the wind in the cottonwoods. The land was quiet, alive. For the first time in a long time, his mind wasn't full of ghosts, just the sound of life, steady and real. He closed his eyes and let the peace of the ranch settle over him like a blanket. Tomorrow, he thought, he'd start work with the sunrise. A new place, a new start. Maybe if the land was kind and luck stayed steady, this could be the place where his past finally stopped following him. The days at the McDowell Ranch fell into a steady rhythm ruled by the sun, the cattle, and the will of Angus McDowell. Arthur rose before dawn when the air was sharp and cold and worked until the sky burned orange at dusk. His body ached each night, but it was an honest ache, the kind that came from work done well. He spoke little, never complained, and did whatever was asked without question. He fixed fences, shoed horses, and calmed nervous cattle with a gentle, patient hand. Even the old foreman, Bartholomew, a man known to trust nobody but himself, began to rely on him. The other hand saw it, too. There was something solid about Arthur Morgan, like a fence post driven deep into the earth. Mai saw it most of all. She wasn't supposed to. Her father's rules were clear: keep clear of the bunkhouse, keep clear of the hands. But the ranch was her home, and Arthur was part of it now. She saw him in the mornings leading the horses out to pasture, or at dusk, quiet and alone, sitting by the corral with a cigarette glowing in the twilight. He didn't laugh loud like the others. He didn't boast or swagger. He just worked and kept to himself. Something about that stillness drew her in. She'd grown up around loud men, ranch hands who talked big and worked little. Arthur was different. He seemed carved from the same stone as the mountains. Sometimes her father took her with him on rides to check the herds. Those were the only moments she was allowed to see Arthur up close. One morning, they found him fixing a broken windmill. He was perched high on the wooden frame, turning a wrench with steady, precise movements. Angus called up, figured that pump was dead for good. Arthur looked down, wiping his hands on a rag. Just slipped its track, Mr. McDowell. Should be drawing water again soon. He gave a small nod toward Mai. Morning, Miss Mai. She hadn't expected him to speak to her. Good morning, Mr. Morgan, she said, her voice sounding too loud in her own ears. Angus frowned. No need for you to be up there risking your neck. I pay you to drive cattle, not fix pumps. Arthur gave a faint smile. A thirsty cow don't fetch much, sir. Then he went back to work. Mai turned her face away so her father wouldn't see the small smile tugging at her lips. She admired that, how Arthur said what needed saying without a trace of arrogance. A week later, Mai found him by the creek that ran along the edge of the property. The heavy spring rains had eaten away a section of the bank, and Arthur was down in the mud stacking stones to stop it from washing out. She dismounted from her horse and walked closer. My father didn't tell you to do that. Arthur didn't look up. No, but come next spring runoff, this side will give way if it's not shored up. You notice things, she said. A man alone learns to pay attention, he answered quietly. Either you learn how the world fits together or how it falls apart. His words stayed with her. They weren't about creeks or stones. They were about him. She wanted to ask about the mines, about why he'd left. But she didn't. It felt like a door best left closed. Instead, she said, why ranch work then, after mining? He paused, hands resting on his knees. Because the sun's better company than the dark, that was all he said. But for Mai, it was enough. In the days that followed, they crossed paths more often. At first, it was small, passing by the barn, a polite nod, a shared glance at the supper table when Angus wasn't looking. But each moment built on the last, like drops filling a bucket. One afternoon, Mai was sitting on the porch mending a torn saddle blanket when Arthur came to the well for water. He nodded toward the book beside her. That another story from back east. She looked at the cover, smiling faintly. It's about ladies who spend all day worrying about the right dress to wear. Feels like reading about another planet. Arthur filled his bucket. Nothing wrong with easy worries, he said. Maybe, she said, threading her needle. But I think it's better to have worries that matter. At least then you know you're alive. He leaned against the well, thoughtful. I reckon everyone's got fences around them. The trick is finding the gate. Then he picked up the bucket and walked off, leaving her staring after him. That night, she couldn't sleep. His words played over in her mind. The trick is finding the gate. But the quiet peace of the ranch didn't last. A few weeks later, Angus McDowell returned from town with a face like thunder. Word had reached Dry Creek of a disaster up north, a mine collapse that had killed a foreman. The talk was ugly. Some said it wasn't an accident. Some said the man responsible had fled, and one name came up again and again, Morgan. Angus said nothing to Mai, but she felt the change the moment he came home. His watchfulness turned to suspicion. He sent Arthur to work in the far pastures, away from the house. The other hands grew distant, too, whispering when Arthur passed. Mai knew her father well enough to sense his fear, and she knew that fear ruled him more than anger ever had. But what she had seen in Arthur's eyes wasn't the look of a killer. It was the look of a man carrying grief too heavy to speak aloud. For Arthur, the coldness of the ranch was a familiar thing. He'd felt it before in other places when the past had caught up to him. He said nothing. He worked harder, but the loneliness pressed on him like the desert sun. One evening, as the light faded, Mai found him near the water trough. Her heart pounded, but she couldn't stay silent any longer. "Mr. Morgan," she said. He stopped but didn't turn fully. "Miss Mai, I heard the stories," she said softly. About the mine, about the man who died. The air was heavy between them. For a long time, he said nothing. Then finally, in a low voice rough with pain, he answered, "Some things are better left buried, Miss Mai." There was no anger, no defense, just finality. And then he walked away, leaving her standing in the dust, her heart breaking under the weight of what she didn't understand. Summer burned hot and cruel across Dry Creek Valley. The grass turned brittle, and even the cattle stood still in the thin shade of the junipers. The creek was a trickle now, a lazy line of muddy water. The air shimmered with heat, and tempers grew short. Arthur worked harder than ever, sweating through his shirt each day, his body covered in dust and sun. He didn't complain. He didn't look toward the house anymore, though sometimes, when he thought no one noticed, his eyes found the upstairs window where a lamp burned late into the night. He knew it was Mai's. One blistering afternoon, Bartholomew sent him to mend a stretch of barbed wire at the far edge of the ranch. He worked until his hands bled, then mounted dusty and headed back. All he could think of was water, cold, clean water. There was a small pond behind the barn, hidden among the cottonwoods and willows. It was fed by a spring, and its water stayed cool even on days like this. He knew the others would be inside, escaping the heat. Angus McDowell would be in his office doing figures. He'd be alone. Arthur tied Dusty near the barn, grabbed a piece of soap from his bag, and pushed through the hanging branches into the quiet shade. The pond was still and dark, the air rich with the scent of wet earth and green leaves. He stripped off his sweat-soaked clothes and stepped into the water. It was icy, shocking, perfect. He sank to his shoulders and closed his eyes, letting the coolness wash the heat and dust from his skin. For the first time in months, he felt clean, not just in body, but in spirit. Here, he wasn't a drifter or a man running from ghosts. He was just a man breathing. He didn't know that Mai was near. Her favorite colt, Morning Star, had slipped its latch again. She'd followed its tracks through the dust, muttering under her breath about the animal's stubbornness. They led straight to the cottonwoods. Pushing through the willows, she expected to find the colt drinking. Instead, she saw Arthur. he stood waist-deep in the pond, his back turned to her, the sunlight breaking across his wet skin. He was strong and scarred, his muscles marked by a life of labor. He tilted his head back into the light, eyes closed, lost in a kind of quiet peace. Mai froze, her heart jumped to her throat. She knew she should leave, but her feet wouldn't move. The sight of him, unarmed, unguarded, felt too intimate to look at and too powerful to look away from. She stepped back. A twig cracked under her boot. Arthur turned, calm and unhurried. His grey eyes met hers through the shimmer of water and light. Neither spoke. The world went still except for the soft drip of water from his arms. He didn't hide himself. He didn't shout. He just looked at her with quiet surprise and something gentler, a flicker of amusement, maybe even trust. The tension in her chest broke. She wanted to run, but she couldn't. Then in that calm, deep voice of his, he said, "If you're going to watch, miss, might as well tell me your name." Her face went crimson. She turned and fled, heart hammering, branches clawing at her sleeves. She didn't stop until she reached the main yard, where Morning Star stood calmly chewing the roses by the porch. She grabbed his reins with trembling hands, her breath coming in sharp, uneven gasps. That night, she could barely think. Her father talked at supper about cattle prices and water rights, but she didn't hear a word. She could still see Arthur in the sunlight, his quiet smile, and those words, asking for her name. For Arthur, that moment stayed with him, too. He'd watched her run, her hair tangled, her face burning, and he'd laughed. A small, rough sound he hadn't made in years. For the first time since the mines, he'd felt human again. 2 days later, she came to him. He was in the corral with Morning Star, the same colt that had led her to him. The animal was skittish, but Arthur worked slow, steady, whispering softly as he moved. Mai leaned on the fence and watched him. When he finished, he turned toward her. "He's a good one," Arthur said, nodding to the colt. "Just needs to know who to trust." "I know the feeling," she said quietly. Then after a pause, "It's Mai." He looked at her, surprised, and then smiled that same soft, tired smile. "Mai," he repeated. "That's a fine name." From then on, everything changed. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was full of things unsaid, of feelings neither dared to speak aloud. They stole moments at the fence line, in the barn, under the wide Nevada sky. She brought him water some nights when he couldn't sleep. He told her stories of the lands he'd seen, the forests of Oregon, the red canyons of Utah, the endless plains under a sky full of stars. He told them not to boast, but because he wanted her to see the world through his eyes. She listened like she was drinking life itself. But love in a hard land never stays hidden long. Angus McDowell noticed the change. The way his daughter smiled now, the way her eyes followed the quiet drifter. His fear, always close, turned to anger. He waited until the rains came again, grey and cold. Then one afternoon, standing in the barn doorway, he told Arthur what he'd decided. "When this mud dries," he said, his voice flat, "you're gone." Arthur didn't argue. "You've had good work from me," he said simply. Angus's eyes burned. "You've had too much from me. My daughter looks at you, and I won't have it. I won't have your kind near her." Arthur nodded. "When the rain stops," Mai knew before he told her. She saw it in his eyes, that quiet resignation. It filled her with a grief that felt like fury. Her father's fear had built a wall between her heart and the only person who truly saw her. When the roads dried, Arthur packed his little bag. The sky hung low and heavy, ready for another storm. He rode out with 2 ranch hands escorting him. None of them spoke. They were just reaching the boundary line when thunder cracked and rain came pouring down. Out of the trees stepped 3 riders, hard men with guns drawn. Arthur knew one of them, Clayton Rourke, a ghost from the mines. "Well, Morgan," Rourke called, his voice mocking. "Didn't think I'd find you playing cowboy." Arthur's eyes narrowed. "You should have stayed gone." Rourke. Lightning flashed. The world exploded into sound. Gunfire ripped the air. Arthur dove from his horse, rolling in the mud, firing back. One of Rourke's men fell screaming. The storm roared overhead, drowning out the shots. A blast from a shotgun hit Arthur's shoulder. He stumbled, bleeding, but fired again. The second gunman dropped. Rourke cursed and charged through the willows. Back at the ranch, Mai heard the shots through the thunder. She ran to her horse, ignoring her father's shouts. She rode hard into the storm, the rain cutting her face, her heart wild with fear. She found Dusty first, riderless and trembling. Then she saw him. Arthur slumped against a cottonwood by the pond, his shirt soaked in blood. She fell to her knees beside him. "Arthur!" He opened his eyes weakly. "Mai, you shouldn't be here, I'm not leaving you," she whispered, her hand shaking as she pressed against his wound. Not again. When the foreman Bartholomew found them, Mai was still holding Arthur, crying into his shoulder as rain washed the blood from his skin. Together they carried him home. 2 days passed before he woke. When he opened his eyes, Mai was there, her head resting on her arms by his bed. She stirred, saw him watching her, and smiled through her tears. "You came back," she whispered. "You were calling me," he said softly. Later that day, Angus McDowell came to the doorway, hat in hand, his face lined with shame. He had heard the truth. Clayton Rourke's confession, the sheriff's report. Arthur Morgan had not been a killer. He'd been the only good man in a bad place. "I was wrong," Angus said quietly. "You saved her. You saved us all." Arthur looked up at him. "You love your daughter," he said. "That's all that matters." In the weeks that followed, Arthur healed, and Mai stayed by his side, but both of them knew they couldn't stay. The ranch held too many ghosts. So one morning, under a pale dawn sky, they saddled their horses. Angus stood on the porch watching, his eyes full of sorrow and pride. Mai rode her mother's old mare. Arthur rode Dusty. When they reached the ridge above the valley, she turned to him and smiled. "I think the gate isn't here," she said softly. "It's out there somewhere." Arthur looked toward the endless land beyond. "Then let's go find it." They rode side by side into the rising sun, the valley behind them, the wide, untamed west ahead. Two souls set free at last.